They called me every night at the same time. I never answered, but then I turned on the answering machine. The recording contained only my voice. "I found you." It began 3 weeks ago on a rain-soaked Tuesday in October. The kind of evening when Boston's fog clings to brick buildings and streetlights cast hazy halos through the mist. I was working late at my downtown office, finishing a case report. As a private investigator with 15 years under my belt, I'd developed a reputation for handling unusual cases, but nothing prepared me for what was about to unfold. I didn't notice the missed call until I was packing up to leave. Just another spam number, I figured. But something about it caught my attention, a sequence that seemed deliberately patterned. 000000000. I dismissed it and drove home to my apartment in Beacon Hill, an old converted brownstone with creaking floors and drafty windows. The place had character, as realtors like to say about buildings that should have been renovated decades ago. But it suited me fine. That night, another call came through at exactly 2:46 a.m. I woke to the blue glow of my phone screen illuminating the bedroom. Same number. I let it ring until it stopped, then rolled over and tried to sleep. Just another automated system with a glitch, I reasoned. By the third night, curiosity got the better of me. I activated my answering machine, figuring I'd screen whatever robocall or marketing pitch was disrupting my sleep. When I checked the recording the next morning, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air seeping through my windows. The voice on the recording was mine. Clear as day. "I found you." I played it 3 times, analyzing every inflection, every subtle tone. It was unmistakably my voice, yet I had no memory of ever saying those words. At least, not in that particular cadence, with that specific underlying menace. As a detective, I'm trained to look for rational explanations. Voice manipulation software exists. Someone could have compiled samples of my voice from various sources, phone calls, the occasional media interview when a case garnered public attention, even my outgoing voicemail message. But why? And why this specific number pattern? I brought the recording to an audio specialist that afternoon, a former client named Marcus who ran a sound engineering studio near Cambridge. "This is definitely your voice, Alex," he said, sliding his headphones off after listening to the clip several times. "But there's something off about it. Some subtle distortion that doesn't match natural speech patterns. Could it be AI generated? Or spliced together from other recordings?" I asked, hoping for a simple technological explanation. Marcus frowned, running the audio through some analysis program on his computer. "Possibly. But whoever did it is good. Really good. There's something else strange about this recording too." He pointed to a waveform on his screen. "There's a secondary audio track embedded beneath the voice. Almost subsonic." He isolated it and amplified the sound. What emerged was disquieting, the faint sound of breathing in what might have been wind, or perhaps static. That night, I set up recording equipment of my own. At precisely 2:46 a.m., the call came in. I steeled myself and answered. Silence greeted me. Then that same ambient noise, like wind rushing through a narrow space. "Who is this?" I demanded. A soft click echoed through the line, and the call ended. My phone chimed with a notification, "Audio file saved." I opened it with shaking hands. The recording lasted 2 minutes. First the ambient noise, then heavy breathing that seemed to synchronize with my own as I listened. And finally, my voice again. "Don't turn around." The hairs on my neck stood up as I fought the instinctive urge to look behind me. My apartment was secure, deadbolts, window locks, even a basic security system. Nobody could have entered without my knowledge. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of a presence just beyond my peripheral vision. I spent the rest of the night with my back to the wall, gun in hand, watching the empty apartment until dawn broke through the windows. The next morning, I called an old contact at the phone company, Detective Sarah Chen. We'd worked together on cases involving phone harassment and cyberstalking. "Alex, that number doesn't exist," she told me after running a check. "It's not registered with any carrier. It shouldn't be able to place calls at all." "There has to be some explanation," I insisted. "Could it be spoofed?" "Sure, numbers get spoofed all the time. But usually, there's a real number behind the fake one. This is different. It's like the calls are coming from nowhere." I thanked her and hung up, then methodically went through my recent call history. One entry made my blood run cold: a call made from my number to my number at 2:46 a.m. 2 nights ago. A call I never made. I played the recording associated with it. I'm already inside. The voice was mine, but with a subtle echo effect, as if spoken in a vast empty space. That evening, I set up a security camera in my bedroom, angled to capture the entire space. I placed my phone on the nightstand where the screen would be visible in the frame. Then I took a sleeping pill, hoping to counteract the insomnia that had plagued me since the calls began. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. For the first few hours, nothing unusual occurred. I could see myself sleeping, occasionally shifting position. At exactly 2:46 a.m., my phone's screen illuminated, casting a blue glow across the room. I didn't wake up, the sleeping pill had done its job. And then, inexplicably, the video feed darkened. Not completely black, but as if a shadow had fallen across the lens. The timestamp continued running, but the image was obscured for approximately 3 minutes. When the image cleared, there was something different about the room. It took me several viewings to spot it. The chair in the corner, previously empty, now appeared to have a darker area. A silhouette. Something or someone sitting there. I enlarged the image, enhanced it as best I could with my limited software. The shape was humanoid but indistinct, like a smudge of deeper darkness against the shadows of the room. As I watched, the figure slowly stood. The movement was unnatural, not jerky, but too fluid, as if underwater. And then the recording abruptly ended. I checked the camera. It was still functional, but the memory card had filled up exactly at that moment. I scrolled through the footage one more time, looking for any sign of tampering or editing. There was none. That evening, I called my former partner, Mike Donovan. He'd retired from the force 2 years ago but still kept his hand in security consulting. If anyone could make sense of this, it would be Mike. "You're sure your place is secure?" he asked after I explained the situation. "Positive. Nobody's been in or out except me. I've checked the locks, the windows, even the ventilation ducts." Mike was silent for a moment. "What about carbon monoxide?" Could explain the memory gaps, the feeling of being watched. "First thing I checked. Detectors working fine, no alarms." "Sleep paralysis then? Been under stress lately?" I laughed without humor. "Always. But that doesn't explain the calls or the recordings." Mike sighed. "Look, I don't like this. Why don't you stay at my place tonight? We can set up surveillance, see if anything happens when you're not there." The offer was tempting, but something told me the phenomenon wasn't tied to my apartment. It was tied to me. "Thanks, but I need to see this through. Whatever's happening, I need answers." After we hung up, I did another sweep of the apartment, checking every possible hiding place. Nothing. I even examined the walls for hidden passages or crawl spaces, an occupational hazard of too many cases involving old buildings with forgotten architectural quirks. By midnight, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. Stress and sleep deprivation could explain a lot. I'd call my doctor in the morning, maybe get a referral to someone who could help me work through whatever psychological episode one was experiencing. I was just about to turn in when my laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender field was blank. The subject line read, 2:46 a.m. The message contained only an audio file. My hand hovered over the mouse, reluctant to click on it. Finally, professional curiosity won out. I ran a virus scan on the attachment before opening it. It was a recording of myself, asleep. The sound of my breathing, the occasional rustle of bedsheets. And in the background, almost imperceptible, another set of breaths, perfectly synchronized with mine but slightly deeper. I slammed the laptop shut and paced the apartment, gun drawn. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every random noise, the building settling, neighbors moving around, traffic outside, seemed amplified and sinister. At 2:30 a.m., I positioned myself in the living room, lights on, with clear sightlines to every entrance. My phone sat on the coffee table. I waited, watching the minutes tick by on my watch. 2:44 a.m. I checked all the locks again. 2:45 a.m. The lights flickered briefly but steadied. At precisely 2:46 a.m., there was a knock at the door. 3 measured raps that echoed through the apartment like gunshots. Simultaneously, my phone rang, displaying the familiar 000-000-0000. I approached the door cautiously, gun aimed. The peephole showed an empty hallway. I pressed my ear against the wood but heard nothing. My phone continued ringing. Against my better judgment, I answered and put it on speaker. The line crackled. Then my voice, but not me, spoke. "You found me." A cold draft swept through the apartment, though all windows were closed. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I stood frozen between the door and the phone, caught in a moment of paralyzing indecision. Whatever waited on the other side of that door, whatever had been calling me, watching me, using my voice, was about to reveal itself. And I wasn't certain I was prepared for what I might discover. Because the most terrifying question wasn't who was calling, or how they were using my voice. The real question, the one that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness since this began, was why my subconscious recognized the cadence of those words. Why part of me seemed to know this caller. And what it meant about the fractured pieces of my own identity that I'd never dared examine too closely. I took a deep breath and reached for the doorknob, no longer able to distinguish between fear and a detective's inherent need to uncover the truth, no matter how disturbing. What lies beyond the boundaries of our perception? What versions of ourselves exist in the spaces between what we remember and what we've forgotten? And how thin is the line between investigation and obsession, between pursuing the truth and being pursued by it? The doorknob was cold beneath my fingers as I slowly turned it. "I've been waiting for you," my voice said from the phone, still clutched in my other hand. The door swung open. The man standing in the hallway wore my face. Not identical, older perhaps, with deeper lines around the eyes and a scar along the jawline I'd never had. But unmistakably me. Or a version of me. "Hello, Alex," he said, and his voice matched the recordings perfectly. "It's time we talked about what happened at Lakeside. About what you've been running from all these years." Lakeside. The word unlocked something, a flood of fragmented memories. A cabin by still waters. A night in December 17 years ago. Blood on snow. And a decision that split my life into before and after. "You're not real," I managed to say, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. "I'm as real as you are," he replied with a sad smile. "Maybe more so, since I've accepted what we did." The hallway behind him seemed to stretch and distort, the familiar dimensions of my apartment building giving way to something older, something that smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. "Come back with me," he said, extending his hand. "It's time to face it. The anniversary is coming. 17 years is long enough to hide." I stared at his outstretched hand, aware that I stood at a crossroads. Behind me lay the life I'd constructed, my career as a detective, my apartment, my careful routines designed to keep certain memories at bay. Before me stood a manifestation of everything I'd tried to forget, offering a reckoning I'd postponed for nearly 2 decades. "What happens if I go with you?" I asked, already knowing I would. "Integration," he said simply. "Resolution. The chance to be whole again." I looked back at my apartment one last time, at the evidence of my fractured investigation, the camera, the recordings, the frantic notes. All along, I'd been pursuing myself, the parts I'd locked away after that night at Lakeside. I took his hand. His fingers were solid, warm, real. Together, we stepped across the threshold, into a space between memory and reality, searching for the truth about what happened at Lakeside, and who we really were in the aftermath. Behind us, the phone on the coffee table emitted one final message in our shared voice: "Begin again." Where does a detective go when the mystery leads inward? And what do we find when the case we're solving is the one we've hidden from ourselves? Sometimes the most haunting calls come from within. The path we walked was neither the hallway of my apartment building or the forest path to Lakeside, but something in between, a liminal space where the walls occasionally rippled like water and the floor beneath our feet changed from hardwood to forest mulch and back again. The air smelled of both city pollution and pine needles, an impossible combination that somehow made perfect sense. "You're a manifestation of my guilt," I said as we walked. "A psychological projection. That's the rational explanation." My doppelganger laughed. "Always the detective. Always needing to solve the puzzle." He glanced at me with eyes that held 17 years of memories I'd tried to erase. "Would a psychological projection know things you forced yourself to forget?" "Like what?" I challenged. "Like the license plate number of the car that night. Like what was in the locked box we buried by the eastern shore. Like the real reason we became a detective after it happened." Each detail hit like a physical blow, triggering flashes of memory so vivid they almost brought me to my knees. The Massachusetts plate, mud-spattered but still legible in the headlights. The heavy metal box with its rusted lock. The nightmares that drove me to pursue a career solving mysteries so I wouldn't have to face my own. "This is impossible," I murmured, but with less conviction. "What did Dr. Whitaker tell you during those therapy sessions you abandoned after 3 visits?" my other self asked. "About traumatic dissociation?" Another shard of memory, an office with soft lighting, a woman with sympathetic eyes and a notepad. "Sometimes the mind protects itself by fragmenting experience, Alex. By creating separate compartments for memories too painful to integrate." She said it wasn't uncommon, I replied reluctantly, for individuals who experience severe trauma to develop compartmentalized memory systems. "Not just memory systems," my guide corrected. "Entire aspects of identity. Especially when the trauma occurs during formative years. Especially when it's tied to actions the conscious mind cannot reconcile with its self-image." We reached what appeared to be a door, standing alone in the shifting space. It looked exactly like the entrance to the lakeside cabin, weathered wood with a small window at eye level. Through it, I could see firelight. "Is this real?" I asked, my hand hovering over the familiar brass doorknob. "Or am I having some kind of psychotic break?" "Both can be true," he replied. "Reality isn't as solid as you pretended all these years. Neither is your sense of self." He pushed the door open, and the smell of wood smoke enveloped us. Inside was the main room of the cabin, exactly as I remembered yet somehow wrong. The dimensions seemed off, certain details exaggerated, the stone fireplace loomed larger than should have been possible, and the shadows it cast moved independently of the flames. "December 16, 2006, my other self said, moving to stand by the fire. "You were 22. Home from college for winter break." "Stop," I said, a primal fear rising in my throat. "I don't want to remember." "But you need to. The anniversary is in 2 days. 17 years, Alex. The calls began because it's time. You've been running for too long." I noticed something I hadn't before, a door at the back of the cabin that shouldn't have been there. It was modern, metal, with a keypad lock. Completely incongruous with the rustic interior. "What's behind that door?" I asked. "The rest of you," he answered simply. "The parts you've locked away. The memories. The guilt. The truth about what happened that night. And you have the code." My detective instincts were kicking in, treating this impossible situation like just another case to solve. He smiled sadly. "I am the code, in a sense. But you're not ready yet. There are things you need to see first, to remember." The cabin shifted around us, and suddenly we were outside, standing at the lake's edge. Snow covered the ground, reflecting moonlight so bright it hurt my eyes. The water was black glass, perfectly still. "This is where it started," my other self said, pointing to a spot on the shore where the snow was disturbed. "With the argument." As if his words were a conjuring spell, figures appeared, translucent, like ghosts, but with the vibrant movements of life. One was me, 17 years younger, face flushed with anger or cold or both. The other was a man I recognized with a jolt of mixed emotions, Daniel Mercer, my best friend since childhood. "I told you to drop it," young me shouted, shoving Daniel backward. "It was an accident." Daniel yelled back. "But we have to tell someone. We can't just pretend it didn't happen." I turned to my doppelganger. "Daniel," I whispered. I'd forgotten his face. "You tried to," he corrected. "Just like you tried to forget what happened next." The scene before us played out like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The argument escalating. Daniel turning to leave, saying he was going to call the police. Young me grabbing a flashlight from his pocket. The sick sound of metal connecting with skull. Daniel falling, blood darkening the snow. The moment of stunned horror as young me realized what he'd done. "No," I said, backing away. "That's not how it happened. It was self-defense. He attacked me first. He had a knife." My doppelganger looked at me with pity. "Is that the story you've been telling yourself for 17 years? The scene shifted. Young me dragging Daniel's body toward the lake. The splash as it broke the surface. The frantic cleanup of blood-stained snow. The burial of the flashlight and Daniel's wallet in a metal box on the eastern shore. The official story was that he fell through the ice while drunk, my other self narrated dispassionately. His body wasn't found until spring thaw. By then, evidence of head trauma was attributed to rocks in the lake bed. No one suspected foul play. Especially not from his grieving best friend, who organized the search parties and comforted his family. I felt physically ill, watching the calculated actions of a person who wore my face but whose cold efficiency seemed alien. "I couldn't have done this," I insisted. "I investigate crimes. I solve them. I don't commit them." "And why do you think you chose that path?" my doppelganger asked. "Atonement? Overcompensation? Or something darker, a fascination with the mechanics of covering up violence, born from your own experience?" I had no answer. The scene before us dissolved, replaced by a rapid-fire montage of memories, the funeral, where I stood stoically beside Daniel's parents, my decision to drop out of college and eventually pursue criminal justice, the nightmares that plagued me for years until I learned to suppress them, the relationships I sabotaged whenever they grew too intimate, for fear of revealing my secret. And through it all, the growing skill at compartmentalization. The construction of a new Alex, dedicated detective, seeker of justice, built atop the hidden foundation of what I'd done at Lakeside. "The calls," I said suddenly, a realization dawning. "They started 3 weeks before the anniversary." My guide nodded. "The barriers you built are breaking down. Age. Stress. The natural process of psychological integration that happens in midlife. Your mind is trying to heal itself, to become whole again. We were back in the cabin now, standing before the metal door. What's really behind there? I asked. Acceptance, he replied. The version of yourself that can acknowledge what happened, take responsibility for it, and still find a way to move forward. Integration doesn't mean absolution, Alex. It means wholeness. Seeing yourself clearly, both the light and the dark. He stepped closer, and for a moment, his features seemed to blur into mine. The code is 1-2-1-6, he said quietly. December 16th. You need to enter it yourself. My hand trembled as I approached the keypad. What happens after? Do I turn myself in? Live with this knowledge? How do I wake up from this, whatever this is? Those are questions only you can answer, he said, his voice now sounding identical to mine, as though the separation between us was dissolving. But you'll answer them as a complete person, not the fragmented shadow you've been. With a deep breath, I punched in the code. 1-2-1-6. The door swung open to blinding light and the sound of a phone ringing. The noise grew louder until it consumed everything, and I was falling, drowning in sound and memory and light. I woke with a violent start, drenched in sweat. I was in my bed, in my apartment. Morning light streamed through the windows. The phone on my nightstand was ringing. The display showed a normal number, Mike Donovan's. I answered, my voice hoarse. Hello? Alex? You okay? You sound terrible. I cleared my throat. Just, bad dreams. What's up? You asked me to look into that number, remember? The one that's been calling you. Well, there's something strange. The carrier finally got back to me. That number was active 17 years ago. Registered to a Daniel Mercer. My blood turned to ice. What? Yeah, weird coincidence. There was a Daniel Mercer who went missing up at Lakeside back in '06. Cold case. Body eventually found, ruled accidental. But get this, the phone records show his last call was to you. The room seemed to tilt around me. On my desk, the calendar showed the date, December 14th, 2023. 2 days before the anniversary. Mike, I need to. I'll call you back. I hung up and sat frozen, reality and nightmare blurring together. My laptop was open on the bedside table. The browser was open to a news article I had no memory of searching for, Lakeside cold case reopened after new evidence emerges. The phone rang again. This time, the display showed 000-000-0000. With shaking hands, I answered. It's time to go back to Lakeside, my voice said from the other end. It's time to make things right. I found myself nodding. I know. As I spoke those words, something shifted within me, a lock releasing, a wall crumbling. Memories flooded back, no longer held at bay by elaborate psychological defenses. The guilt was crushing, but with it came something unexpected, relief. The exhaustion of maintaining the lie, of running from myself, had been its own kind of prison. Who am I really speaking to? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You know who I am, the voice replied. The question is, are you ready to become who you really are? Complete. Integrated. Responsible for both your past and your future.